Welcome again to Ask a Pastor. I have to apologize. We're still not back to our normal pattern of doing things. I'm still working on the follow-up video that I've been working on for a few weeks. It's been held up because partly with finishing up my theological training, which most of you know about, and also just got muddled up with planning or preparing for last week's sermon and now preparing for next week's service at St. Mark's. It's been a whole lot to do in a very short amount of time, and as I've said, I don't want to try to answer a question and not really have had time to completely come up with what I think is a satisfactory answer. And so I hope that you will forgive me for the tardiness in following up the final video in that little series I was doing. God willing, should be here next week, and after that I'll follow up with some questions that a number of you have asked about very specific Bible passages. But today we've got something that I think is interesting. We're going to hear from our vicar, Mark. We don't usually hear from him on Ask a Pastor, but a number of months ago, he received some questions from primary school children about what it is that he does and what happens in the church. And I thought it was really interesting, the answers that he gave, how he responded to these children about what he does and what faith is. And I thought that this would be a really good format to share that with you. Some of you may have seen it online already, but not all of you will have. And I thought it was a nice version of Ask a Pastor, where it's not most of you specifically asking questions, but actually hearing our vicar Mark responding to questions that young people have had about him and his job and our faith. So I hope you enjoy this. Hand things straight over to Mark.
Hello everybody, and thank you so much for asking me lots of questions about being a vicar, and I'm going to have a go at answering some of those that you've asked. And here I am at St. Mark's Church. It's one of the two churches that we've got in the parish of Great Clacton. The other one's St. John's Church, the one that's near your school. And I've just come over here to film my answers to your questions. Now, they were really, really good questions, and there was lots of them. So what I've done is I've broken them down into 4 groups of questions that kind of go together in 4 different groups, and I'm going to have a go at answering each of those in turn. So the first group of questions is really about me personally, and why I've ended up as a vicar. So the sort of questions you were asking is, what made you think about becoming a church minister, and why did you want to be one? And those are really good questions. So when I was growing up, when I was your age, when I was at school, I hadn't really thought about being a church minister at all. Now, my parents, mum and dad, they did bring me along to church because I used to go to church. And I know that's not what happens in lots of families these days, today in Clacton, though some families do go to church together. But when I was growing up in Ireland, lots of families went to church together. And I'm really grateful to my parents for bringing me along to church, because it gave me a chance to find out about what Christianity was all about, and then to, when I was old enough, kind of decide for myself whether I was going to keep going to church, whether I was going to be a Christian myself, whether I was going to follow the Christian faith. And when I was a teenager, I began to think to myself, well, if this is true, if God is real, this is something really special, and I need to think about it carefully, and I need to take it really seriously. That's what I began to think. And so I began to think about it more and more seriously. And it wasn't until after school, and when I'd finished at secondary school, I went to university, and there I became part of a church. I was away from home, away from my family, I became part of a church, joined a church for myself, started going along, and there a minister was really, really helpful to me. I had lots of questions I wanted to ask about Christian things. I guess I had finding out lots of things about life and so on as well, and he was really, really helpful in spending time answering the questions I had. And I think it was at that stage I began to think, well, maybe I could do that for other people and help them in a similar sort of way. I didn't become a church minister straight away. After university, I got a job as a teacher, and I taught at a school for 6 years. But all that time I was still thinking, oh, maybe what God wants me to do is to be a church minister. And then it was after that time I had to go and do some training to become a church minister. So I think that kind of answers those two questions. It was something that wanting to be a church minister was something that kind of developed over time with me. And it was maybe that minister who helped me that kind of prompted me to think maybe I could do that for other people as well. So those are really good questions. Your second set of questions was really about generally what it's like being a church minister. And they are questions like, how long have you been doing your job? Well, depends what you mean. I've been the vicar of St John's and St Mark's for 2 years. Now, the vicar in the Church of England is kind of the main minister, the minister who's in charge of a church. So I've done that for 2 years. But for 12 years before that, I was the assistant minister at St John's and St Mark's. That means that there was another vicar. You might have remember him, the Reverend Guy Thorburn. He was the vicar, and I helped him look after the churches. And before that, I was in another church, and I was 4 years, a job that's called a curate. That's like the first job in the Church of England. And I did that for 4 years. So 4 plus 12 plus 2. So I've been a church minister for 18 years in total, but only the last 2 I've been the vicar of St John's and St Mark's. Okay, so a bit of maths in that question. What's next? It asks, do you have a boss or are you your own boss? Well, as a vicar, I'm really in charge of running St John's and St Mark's. So in that sense, I'm my own boss. But I guess our churches are part of the Church of England. And that means that we have to do some things the way the Church of England says. And the way the Church of England runs itself is it's got some people called bishops who are kind of oversee a number of different churches in an area. And there's a bishop for all of Essex and East London called the Bishop of Chelmsford. And I guess if I did something wrong or something like that, I might have to answer to the bishop about things. But normally, day to day, yes, I guess I'm my own boss and have to run St John's and St Mark's myself. But as a Christian minister, I guess God is the ultimate boss, and we're meant to do things the way God wants us to, not just make up how we do things ourselves. Okay, that's a really good question. The next couple of questions are, how hard is it to run a church, and what is it like working in a church? Well, running a church, I think it's quite hard work. I find it quite hard work. But the great thing about it is there's lots of people who are there to help. So I've got people on our team that help run St John's and St Mark's, like Miss Ward, who helps look after the school's work and our work with families. And I've got a number of other people who do different things, who are employed by the church as well, whose job it is to work for the church. Some work in our church office and help with that. Some help with some of the ministry of the church. And also, the great thing about the church is that lots and lots of people volunteer to help. That they give their time freely, they're members of the church, and they want to help out in different ways. And so, although, yes, it is hard work running a church, there's lots of people to help, which is a really brilliant thing. And what's it like working in a church? Well, it's never dull. It's never boring. You get to do lots and lots of different things. Sometimes you get to help people who are maybe sad because they've lost a loved one, and you help them to prepare their funeral. Sometimes you get to work with children and young people and do things with schools and help run our holiday clubs. Sometimes you get to lead and speak at church services. Sometimes you have to work quite hard in the background to get ready for a service and prepare what you're going to say. Sometimes you have to, if you're the vicar, if you're in charge of the church, you have to help other people do their job as well. So it's like deciding who does what role and preparing, enabling other people to do their jobs too. So there's lots and lots and lots of different things that I do, both meeting people and working by myself. So it's a very interesting job most of the time. Sometimes there's slightly too much to do, but it's never boring, never dull. I hope that sort of answers that question. Okay, then the third group of questions were all about more specific things about my job, what I actually do in my job. So you asked me, how many hours a day do you spend helping people? Do you help serve the food during a soup run or a lunch club or things like that? Well, I don't know if I can answer how many hours a day I spend helping people. It depends what you mean by helping people. So some of the time I am meeting people face to face, talking to them, phoning them up, helping them that way. Sometimes I'm helping people out practically if they've got a problem with it. A few times over lockdown, I've been able to help do somebody's shopping or collect something for them because they've been self-isolating in their house. So sometimes there's that practical side to things. But there's also helping people in a more general way as well. Hopefully our church services are a help to people. Because as a church, we want to help people understand Jesus' teaching and help people understand how to trust Jesus, help people understand how to live as a Christian. So hopefully what we do in our church services help people to praise and worship God. Hopefully that's helpful as well. And a lot of time I'm getting ready for those and doing those, as well as the more specific helping people. So I don't know if I can quite answer how many hours a day or a week I do that, but hopefully most of the things that I do are helpful one way or another. Do I ever help serve food at soup runs or lunch clubs and things like that? Well, the answer is sometimes. As I mentioned before, we've got quite a lot of volunteers who offer to help with different things, and we've got quite a lot of volunteers who offer to help at the soup run, when we distribute food to people, when we run a lunch club where people come in and have a meal when we're allowed to do that. Not allowed to do that at the moment because of the virus. So the answer is sometimes. But if there's other people who are happy to volunteer to do the job, I think it's best to let them do it, and then I help out where there's a shortage of people, because I've got other things to get on with as well, other ways I can help people. So if there's volunteers, I tend to let them do that. But last year we were running something called Tea Time Church, which was for families, and we had a short church service with some songs and some crafts and some games and some Bible stories. And then afterwards the families came across for tea. And we were really short of people to serve the food and to clean up afterwards. So that was one place I've helped out practically with serving food and so on. So the answer is sometimes I do that. What things do you attend in the parish? Do you attend youth clubs or coffee mornings or soup runs, children's groups? And what do I enjoy helping at the most? Well, I attend a bit of everything. So, as I say, I don't run everything myself. I try to let other people run things that they are happy to run and can do themselves. But I often go along just to see how it's going. And yes, I do go to youth clubs, I do go to the soup run sometimes, I do go to coffee mornings sometimes, I go to church services, I go to some of the children's groups. And if there's a need, I help out at those. And sometimes I've organised some of those. And it kind of changes over time depending where the need is. But again, we've got a really good team. And if other people are happy to do it and doing it really well, I can leave that to them and I can help with something else. And what do you enjoy doing most, or who do you enjoy helping most? That is such a difficult question. I don't know if I've got a total favourite things. I enjoy meeting people in a whole load of different ways. I suppose I do especially like doing things with schools and with young people. As I mentioned before, I was working for a church, I was a teacher, so I do like helping young people understand things, and I do like trying to help young people understand what the Christian faith is about and trying to think of ways to do that and make it clear and easy to understand what Christianity is about. So I could say my favourite thing is helping you and your class understand what a vicar does. But I do like other things as well. And then our final couple of questions are about our church generally. It says, why do you do morning coffee in church? Well, we do, when we're allowed to, not allowed to at the moment, but when we're allowed to, we serve tea and coffee after our church services. And sometimes we have a special coffee morning where people can just come in and sit and have a cup of tea and coffee, or come into our cafe and have a cup of tea and coffee. And the reason for that is that part of life as a church is people getting on with each other and getting to know each other and helping one another. And a really good way for that is for people to sit down and talk to each other. So we try to encourage people who come to church, not just to come into the building and go to the service and go away again, but to stay and chat and to get to know one another. Because being part of a church is a bit like being part of a family. And we want people to know each other and help one another. So that's why we're quite keen on tea and coffee after things, and maybe eating food together and having tea, coffee, biscuits, juice, whatever. Get people to sit down and get to know one another. Then there was a question about where does the church get the money from to buy the food to help people? So we do give food out to people who need it, some bags of food, and some people have needed it during this lockdown time because not everybody has been able to keep their job and so on. It has been a tricky time for lots of people. That food is all donated, it's all given to us, or the money is given to us. And people who come along to the church are very generous. They give money to support the church, what the church does, and also to support other people in the community around. And we think that's really important as a church, because Jesus' teaching was that we should help other people understand what it means to be a Christian and how to become a Christian, but also Jesus taught us to help people practically when they're in need as well, and show God's love that way. So we think it's a really important thing to do, both teach about the Christian faith and to try and live it out as we help people in our community. So the money is given, and some of it's given from people outside the church, but a lot of it's given by people in the church. And final question is this: why does the church do counselling. Well, I wasn't quite sure what that meant, but if counselling means kind of talking to people and helping people, I guess the church does that because, again, it's one of the ways that it can practically help people with their lives. One of the ways that you can discuss somebody's problems with them and maybe find a way that you can help them. Now, most of us who work for the church aren't sort of specialist counsellors, so there may be things that people have to go and talk to someone else about. But talking about things is a great way to help people. And in a general way, as a minister or other people in the church as well, can chat to people and maybe point them in the right direction to find some of the answers to their problems. And that's maybe just another way that we can show God's love to people and help people along the way. So overall, our job as a church, and my job especially, is to try to help people to live as Christians, if they're part of the church family. That's to understand Jesus' teaching in the Bible and to live it out in their daily lives. It's to help people outside the church family find out about the Christian faith and find out about who God is and who Jesus is, and that gives them a chance to decide if they want to be Christians as well. But it's also to help the whole church to live out their faith and help those in the community, just as Jesus would want us to. Thanks so much for such interesting questions for this video, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye.
So thank you for joining in. I hope that was interesting to you. A little bit different to what we normally do on Ask a Pastor, but I think it's a good thing if we don't do the same thing all the time. Next week, we should be back to normal though. So I'll see you here in 1 week. Take care.